Welcome to today's Prepare, Prevent, Preempt webinar presented by the Pacific Asia Travel Association. Today we are joined by Mr. Imtiaz Mukbil, Executive Editor at Travel Impact Newswire and winner of the 2005 PATA Journalism Award for his coverage of the 2004 tsunami. We will also be joined by Mr. Alexander Kesper, ASEAN EU Management Program, Team Leader and Knowledge Management Officer, the ASEAN Secretariat Indonesia, and Mr. Bert van Welbeek, Managing Director of The Winning Edge. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Imtiaz Mukbil.
Good morning, everyone. Sawadee Krap from Bangkok, and a warm welcome to all who have joined, as well as to my fellow panelists, and thank you very much indeed for your support. This is actually the first webinar of its kind on quite a unique topic for the travel and tourism industry. It also reflects pretty much some of the new things that are emerging within the Pacific Asia Travel Association as well, particularly in the line in view of the changes in leadership that have taken place. And I think we are looking forward to a very positive future for the association. My objective today really is to take the level of thinking in the travel and tourism industry up to an entirely new level, beyond the whole issue of creating jobs and economic growth and resilience. The last 50 years of travel and tourism industry has seen pretty much a heavy emphasis on the creation of jobs, on the creation of economic growth. Now, in view of all the crises that are taking place around the world, it is becoming more important perhaps to focus on the importance of saving jobs, not just creating them. I'd like to say really that we begin by this disclaimer, that the views and analysis in this webinar presentation, my presentation, are my own. They do not reflect those of PATA or any of its associated units, chapters, or members. What you're seeing on the screen is the cover shot of the coverage that I gave to the tsunami. On December 26th, this was right after Christmas. People were sleeping in late, and I just happened to be one of the few people around the world who was probably a bit sober that morning. And it just so happened that when the tsunami struck, it was, I suppose, one of those things where journalists have to rise to the occasion. And it was only a matter of minutes before it was all over the Thai newspapers and over the Thai media. And of course, I was able to get onto it. And over the next 5 days, which was a critical period for the tsunami, when the worst impact was being felt, the most important things that where the people were, how could they be found, the relief that needed to get to them. And there was this vacuum of information over there. And within those first 5 days, I think I was able to provide a lot of background information on where people could donate money, where they could find their relatives, what systems had been set up in place to try and get the help that people needed at that critical time. So for the next 5 days, I put in a whole bunch of stories, all of which have been uploaded on the website, and you can see it there. Most of the impact of the tsunami was essentially short-term. It was largely confined. The tourism impact was largely confined to the first 2-3 months of the tsunami. And there was a lot of movement by international organizations such as the UNWTO, the Pacific Asia Travel Association, to try and get the economic recovery back, to try and get the tourism business back on track as soon as possible. This was one of the clips from the UNWTO. In their news that the tourism sector is pretty hopeful, given all the impact around the region of getting the business coming back again as soon as possible. This was a press release issued by the UNWTO as part of the anticipation that it will not have a long-term impact, and it didn't. But although the crisis itself was extremely severe, it did not have much of a long-term impact beyond the immediate first 3 months. Now, here are some issues that actually needed to be looked at. One of the things that was done by both the private sector and the public sector, the UNWTO in cooperation with Visa, organized a meeting in Phuket, which resulted in the issuance of this thing called the Phuket Action Plan, which was essentially a recovery program that would allow the tourism industry to come back into shape. This, of course, meant a whole bunch of marketing challenges, a lot of promotions and other things that had to be carried out in order to get the business back again and in order to start creating jobs back again. But here is one thing that actually, from a long-term perspective, here is one thing that has not quite met its expectation. One key aspect of the Phuket Action Plan was to ensure that the tourism sector in the 4 countries that were affected by the tsunami emerged from this disaster stronger and more resilient than before, with, and note this, with more environmentally friendly systems, more civil society involvement in the tourism industry, and more revenues from tourism remaining in the local community. Now, whether each one of these points, whether it has actually happened 10 years later, I'm not really sure. I think it is something for those who are interested in researching this a little bit more. It might be useful to look at it that although the industry has recovered, so to speak, whether these 3 key objectives have actually been fulfilled, I think is still a bit of a gray area. Today, the definition of tsunami no longer applies just to monster tidal waves. The whole definition has changed quite a lot. And I'm giving it a much, much more broader perspective today than it has been in the past. Take this issue, for example, these key issues of today identified by the World Economic Forum in its Global Agenda 2015 report, which was only issued just a couple of weeks ago. If you look at the top 10, what I call tsunamis, they call them agendas, but the top trends that are now come out into the public domain: deepening income equality, persistent jobless growth, lack of leadership, rising geostrategic competition, the weakening of representative democracy, rising pollution in the developing world, increasing occurrence of severe weather, intensifying nationalism, increasing water stress, and the growing importance of health in the economy. Each one of these impacts on what is known as the operating environment for the travel and tourism industry and has an indirect benefit, has an indirect consequence, an indirect impact. In terms of crisis, you can have a direct impact such as the tsunami, or you can have an indirect impact, which is what we are seeing right now. The United Nations then began to recognize some of these things. For the first time, I saw the UN Secretary General referring to many of these as existential threats. Existential threats. Now, this is the first time he's actually, I have in my coverage of the United Nations actually seen the United Nations describing some of the current problems today as existential threats. Now, which are some of the 3 key existential threats or man-made tsunamis that are occurring today? One, geopolitical power shifts, the rivalries between the global powers that are affecting the political environment. Number 2, on the economic side, the failure of globalization, which is one of the results of that, of course, is manifested in the rich poor income gap, which is now becoming severe. And the impact on that in terms of polarization and clonalization. That's not a spelling mistake, by the way. It's called clonalization. Clonalization is a word that I coined. Essentially, it means that many cities around the world, because of globalization, are beginning to look identical. You walk into the main streets and the malls of many of these cities, and you won't know which city you are in. There's a sameness, clonalization, that is beginning to set in, which is probably not going to be very good for the travel and tourism industry in the long term. And of course, the third one is environmental impact and climate change, which is getting a lot of global coverage. Now, if you just take one of those issues, which is the geopolitical impact, you will see that here within the Asia-Pacific and within the Levant, the Middle East region, you're already seeing immediate consequences of that. Earlier this year, when there was a geopolitical dispute between China and Japan and the Philippines and Vietnam, the first thing that happened is the travel and tourism industry took a hit. Visitor flows suddenly stopped because visas became difficult. The mood of the people changed against specific countries that were going at each other. And the first and most important impact was that people movements between these countries began to take a sudden down. India and Pakistan, these are all rivals for years. Each time the relations between these 2 countries improves, there is a positive flow on movements between people in those 2 countries. And vice versa. When relations go down, the people movements also go down. We have this year also seen the impact of Russian arrivals in many parts of the world, particularly in Thailand and others, which have been getting a lot of Russian visitors. The number of visitors coming down the number of visitors coming from Russia to Thailand is down pretty significantly this year because of the impact of the ruble and the sanctions and the decline in the oil prices and all the other various things, which is part of the global geopolitical shifts. And of course, the Middle East, the historic, long unresolved problem between Palestine and Israel continues to have a huge global impact all around the world. Now, if you look at it, in terms of addressing these crises, the first issue that comes up, of course, is that of early warnings. Well, when the tsunami struck, the first thing that happened after that was that they had to start setting up early warning systems. And today you've got early warning systems with satellites and everything else to make sure that when the tsunami strikes again, if and when the tsunami strikes again, The number of casualties because of advanced early warning will be absolutely minimal. People will have enough time to find safety, find refuge, and get away. That is the advantage of an early warning. Same thing happened in the 1997 currency crisis, which hit Asia. The first thing that central banks, financial institutions, and others did was to set up early warning systems. And they set up then preparations to make sure that if something like this happened, that if there's another attack of the currency, that they have both warning systems as well as mechanisms in place to prevent another debacle like the 97 economic crisis, which in a way was also a tsunami of sorts. And of course, we can all identify with the importance of early warnings at a very personal level. Anybody who's had a medical problem of any kind knows the importance of getting it checked as early as possible in order to facilitate a cure and prevention. Now, how does one address some of these key issues from a prepare, prevent, preempt strategy? Well, my personal way is to follow the Lord Buddha's advice, which is pretty easy when you're living in Thailand. As a journalist, I found this extremely valuable. It's got a very 5-point step of making decisions. Very simple. Listen, think, question, decide, and then act. It's not rocket science. It hasn't come from Harvard Business School. It's pretty logical. It's very, very simple. Most important for me is the need to question. In a world of disinformation and information overload and chaos and people not knowing who to trust, what medium of information to trust, the importance of questioning everything one hears, one reads is becoming paramount these days. And the philosophy, the strategy is very simple in that sense, that if you have a 3P, the 3P of prepare, prevent, and preempt can be met with a 3D strategy, which is to dissent, debate, and democratize, based on the need to question everything, everybody, all the time, particularly decision makers and policy makers. And the more better informed you are, the more skeptical approach people sometimes tend to take to conventional wisdoms. Things do not always turn out to be what they are told to be. And that is becoming one of the defining moments of today's trends. Many of these issues that you're seeing today, the agenda of the world that I mentioned, the World Economic Forum, the existential threats today are not even on the agendas of the global travel and tourism industry. They have a severe impact on the operating environment of the travel and tourism industry, yet they do not even get discussed. That needs to change. Many of these issues have become of critical importance to our jobs, to our economic growth, and becoming critical factors that have long-term impact on that. They need to be put on the agendas of the programs of global conferences, travel trade conferences, and events. As a result of that, the industry needs to develop policy positions and demand a say in influencing strategies and policies. There's far too many decisions being made today without rank and file and people at grassroots level being allowed to have a say. That also needs to change. Early warning systems need to be set up, and like in medical tourism and health tourism these days, alternative solutions need to be pursued as well. In effect, what we need now today is a second opinion. Conclusions. Next. The most important thing that happened after a tsunami, not very well recognized, is that those who were saved were those who knew how to recognize the early warning signs of a tsunami. Those who were saved who knew how to recognize the early warning signs of a tsunami. And you can read more about this in this story on my website. How ancient wisdom helped save an Aceh village. It's quite an interesting story, actually. Do go out and check it out. You'll find it quite fascinating that how satellites, which were not around at that time, but these people knew how to recognize the early warning signs of a tsunami and were thus able to save themselves. The next one, this is a headline, the cover of a story of Asia Week, a publication that is now defunct, from January the 12th, 1994. Complacency. They thought nothing could go wrong in Asia at that time. January 1994, before the economic crisis and all the other problems that began hitting. There was this complacency, Asian tigers, economic growth, nothing is going to go wrong. Well, a lot of things have gone wrong. This is the kind of headline that one needs to be really, really careful of. The next one, Thailand is facing this today almost on an everyday basis. An inability to try and get many of the underlying problems solved. Democracy is not quite producing the results it has, and this is one reason why this year has seen what has effectively turned a 18% growth of 2013 into a potentially minus growth this year for travel and tourism. This is unprecedented in the history of travel and tourism. An entirely man-made crisis, entirely preventable. It should not have happened, but it did. And this is also because of an inability to address some of the underlying problems facing society. Asia, in 1999, just before the new millennium, there was a lot of talk about the Asian century. And the focus was on back to basics. This was the subject of a major conference that was organized by the Nation newspaper here in Bangkok. Has Asia gone back to the basics? I don't think so. A lot of things that still need to be figured out, and we are still, in this part of the world, still listening very much to the wrong advice. It's beginning to spread into Europe now. Many of the changes, Europe's now undergoing a lot of economic and political upheaval as well. Right-wing parties, nationalism, and others beginning to rise over there. In a way, these are all tsunamis of different kinds, and they will end up affecting the travel and tourism industry as well. This was a cover of the latest World Development Report issued by the World Bank. For the first time, the World Bank actually focused on the subject of mind, society, and behavior. Please look it up. It's on the website. It's an amazing report. The focus of a World Bank report, which in the past has always focused on economic issues. Today, this year, for the first time, completely changed the subject and gave it the theme of mind, society, and behavior. Now, what does this have to do with banking and finance and economics? Read that report. It's quite interesting. It's a game changer. It's exactly in line with what this webinar is trying to achieve. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the webinar, a country, a society that has no peace, regardless of what impacts on that peace, will never have tourism. Peace is the fundamental prerequisite of tourism. And this chart from the Vision of Humanity, which issues what is known as a Global Peace Index, has identified the 8 factors that impact on peace, the operating environment that creates peace. If one takes a look at these issues, brings them into the travel and tourism industry, brings them into the travel and tourism agenda, mainstreams them, demands discussion, debate, and dissent, and asks the right question on each of these issues, countries and societies will be able to live in peace within themselves and within their neighbors and within the operating environment. And then only will the entire travel and tourism industry be free of man-made tsunamis and move into the new generation of actually saving jobs, not just creating them. Thank you very much indeed. And I will now pass on to Quinn-Bert van Wolbeck. Oh, sorry, Alex. I beg your pardon. I will now pass on to Alex in Jakarta. Welcome, Alex. Nice to have you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's listening to us all around the world. And special Bajaveri Hendune to our friends in the Maldives. I'm going to talk to you about Prepare, Prevent, Pre-empt 10 years after the tsunami in Aceh. That really was an event that should have been a wake-up call to the world. 240,000 people died and many more lost their livelihoods. I have been very directly involved into these events because I went to Banda Aceh straight after the tsunami and I stayed for 1 year to help with reconstruction. And since then I have been very directly involved in emergency and disaster management in the Asia Pacific with a focus on tourism. So what I'm going to talk to you about today an implementer's point of views. So let's look at the situation here 10 years after the tsunami. What happened? Did common sense take over? Are we all prepared? Or what are the challenges that we are still facing? I have to tell you from my personal point of view, unfortunately, that 10 years after the tsunami, most tourism businesses in Southeast Asia are still not optimally prepared for another tsunami. How about other threats? Let's take a look at Ebola, for example. Have we been prepared here in Asia for it? Has your business been prepared? In my experience and from a lot of discussions about it, I can tell you, even with the background of bird flu and swine flu and the experiences of the past, most NTOs and tourism associations, as well as businesses in Asia, have ignored the Ebola threat. It's just around the corner. The world is a village, but the view prevails that we deal with that problem when it knocks at our door. In my view, it is already knocking, but somehow we do not open. The problems are further aggravated in many places by weak legislation and law enforcement in some countries, and that adds to the vulnerability of destinations. What do I mean? I mean that after the tsunami, In many countries which are tsunami prone, building codes are still not being enforced. Zoning exists on paper, but it is not being enforced. We can still build big hotels right on the waterline, even though it is very likely that the area will be affected by another tsunami at some stage. When I'm looking and mediums are still not existent, or where they are existent, they are not very practical. And also insurances, which make a lot of sense for post-catastrophe recovery, are still very rare. I'm observing a lack of communication and collaboration. Most businesses are trying to prepare and deal with disasters by themselves, even though it would make sense to collaborate on a grander scale, also on a local level. So what happened to common sense? The Asian tsunami, as well as the tsunami in Japan, actually demonstrated that it is not enough to rely on governments to provide protection. Preparedness and readiness are very much up to individual companies and the individuals working there. We cannot wait for others to fix our problems. We have to do it by ourselves together with our partners. And as it was mentioned in the presentation before, the last mile is still a challenge. Yes, we have a lot of really good early warning systems and we've got a lot of situational awareness, but the bottleneck is the last mile. How to get the information to the community at risk and how to translate it into action. And also for that, preparedness is a team activity. We have to share information, we have to evacuate as a group, and if we are too single-minded, we are sure to fail. I have criticized now a lot industry, but responsible where earthquake-prone area, you probably know about it, and you should be familiar with the basics. Later on, Bert is going to talk a lot more in detail about preparedness, but being ready, being prepared is a circular, never-ending process that requires proactiveness and attention to detail. In the end, it's the little things that kill you. So, what do we need first in order to be ready? We need to know the threat. We need to know the hazard. It starts all with situational awareness. We have to know our environment, which hazards. We have to know the hazards themselves and their specifics, and we have to know our early warning systems. It was just mentioned that there are a lot of early warning systems in place since the Asian tsunami, but for example, did you know that the early warning system for the Indian Ocean has been cancelled? The plan was to have a global umbrella early warning system, but for whatever political and financial reasons, that has been eradicated. We have to be aware about the limitations of our early warning systems, and we have to be able to read the information. What are limitations? For example, if you rely on early warning via SMS, if there's an earthquake before the tsunami is triggered, most probably you will not be able to receive SMS. How to read information. If you get an early warning message in Indonesia, you've got 20 minutes. If you get it in the Maldives, you've got several hours. So you also have to know about that. You need to have a monitoring and reporting routine in place. In my experience, a lot of places are reasonably prepared, but only from 8 to 5. Unfortunately, most catastrophes happen out of office hour at 3 o'clock in the morning when the front office is drunk. Have routines in place, and you have to make sure that you can translate information from those early warning systems into action, otherwise it's useless. There's all the information out there that you know, that you require, that you need. For natural hazards, I have listed some of the most common early warning services which are free of charge. AHA Center, provides you all hazard information that you could ever require for Southeast Asia. GDEX is a UN, EU-based early warning service that also gives you predictions about impacts, and Pacific Tsunami Early Warning Center and USGS are also very good for earthquakes. However, it is important that you are connected to your local information providers, to the media, and that you know the most common natural early warning signs for whatever hazard. Of course, there are other threats, man-made threats, political unrest, technical disasters, war, pandemics. For that, it is advisable to have a really good look at the media. But there are also services like OSEC, Overseas Security Advisory Council, that's a US government-based. They give you very, very good analysis about what is going on in your local region. Then, of course, personal networks and relationships are essential. Talk a lot, listen a lot, and listen to your gut. In my experience, when I have a bad feeling that things might be fishy and go wrong, I should follow it, because usually I'm right. But most important, use your common sense. So considering all of that, why is it that preparedness is in my experience, it's mentioned that someone will know what to do when it happens. That, for example, happened in Japan. They had a fantastic system in place. Everybody thought that they were fabulously prepared, so they themselves didn't have to be as ready as they should have been. Also, security and safety is not perceived as a profit center and opportunity yet, but as a liability, which is a great shame, because if we harness the opportunities that come with preparedness, we can get a competitive edge. And most people still have a very narrow view about what security and safety is still all about. Most people associate security and safety with security guards, but it's the entire system that we have to look at. Then, maybe as a provocative thought, duty of care. Is it a Western concept? If you get killed in a Western hotel because the balcony railing is too low, you can sue that company. Try that in Asia. Also, preparedness is hardly requested by the customer and often not enforced by regulators. But my strong belief is that if we give the customer a chance to ask for protective, if we give him a chance to be protected, if he's got a choice whether he wants to stay in a hotel that is prepared for tsunami or earthquake, then of course he will go for the safer option. And at the end of the day, if I sum that all up, the "it won't happen to us" syndrome is the real killer. Let me just give you one quick example, which might be especially interesting for the Maldives, about preparedness and how it can be turned into a competitive advantage. The example here is tsunami-ready hotels. I was in charge for tourism security and safety in Indonesia for 7 years. After the tsunami, in time, we created one. Then we went all around Indonesia for 2 years to teach people how to prepare. Everybody thought it's a good idea. Everybody thought, yes, it makes sense. But after 2 years, nothing much happened. That changed when we started to not just train hotels, we also certified them. We gave them a logo. We listed them on a website. We listed them on Facebook. And we gave them a lot of marketing for being prepared. Since we did that, Tsunami Ready took off. And now it's going to be upscaled to a multi-hazard certification, which might change the way that we are doing tourism and how safe tourism is actually being conducted. And imagine that one day on TripAdvisor, you not decide whether you want to have 3 or 4 restaurants or a pillow menu. If it says on TripAdvisor, this hotel is tsunami ready, that will change the entire industry. Then it doesn't matter anymore whether government has the right regulations in place, because you give the power to one of the most powerful forces on earth, and that is the consumer. If he wants it, we have to do it. So, it's too late to learn how to dance when you arrive at the party. We learn preparedness is not just the job of governments and service providers. It is up to you and your direct environment and neighbors not to become a burden. There are a lot of things that can be done which are really simple to improve your resilience. One more quick example from Bali, the Bali Disaster Reaction Inventory. the tourism industry in Bali created an Excel sheet where they list all the services and all the goods which are essential after disaster strikes. Change them so they can help them after disaster, because it will help you to recover quickly, and you are not so reliant on the big boys out there. When real disaster strikes, we rely on the United Nations or whoever else to come in to sort things out for us. So far, humanitarian assistance has been conducted by governments and by United Nations agencies. But that is going to change, because the United Nations wants to work closer with the private sector, and we're going to create private sector engagement hubs in areas which are especially vulnerable. And just as we did in Bali, we're going to collect contributions and services of the private sector before it happens, to use that in case of disaster. And I hope that you are going to link into this when this is going to be rolled out. So don't wait for the world to change. Change your world first. Prepare, prevent, and preempt. But I would like to add one more point: cooperate. Because at the end of the day, we will be successful if we all work together. Thank you very much.
Let's join Burke in London, I believe.
And greetings and good morning or good afternoon from Europe, where I'm at the moment lecturing. Hello?
Yes.
Where I'm lecturing at the moment at universities, specifically on this subject, and teaching the students, our future leaders, about being more proactive, less reactive, and expect the unexpected. It is like this: are we prepared? And many of you will know the feeling if you're not prepared, as in this picture. Are we prepared for all the labor challenges we have? Are we prepared for all the competitive and leadership that we needed? And as you can see, even Santa Claus sometimes is not as prepared as he should be. So, welcome to Prepare, Prevent, and Preempt. The optimist sees the opportunity in every danger. The pessimist sees danger in opportunity. And that's exactly that fits into being prepared and prevent. Unfortunately, we have in our tourism industry not that many optimists, and people are looking more for danger and sadly not for the opportunity. Because as was mentioned before, the rules of the games are changing, and being prepared, being ready to prevent and to preempt crisis is going to be part of marketing, part of the tourism industry in general, and it will be an opportunity to jump into that tower, because if you don't, and if you keep thinking we saw it won't happen to us, then there's a good chance you will be eaten alive. Coming back to what was discussed by the previous two speakers, it was amazing to realize that when the Indian Ocean tsunami reached Phuket, the four-legged animals knew that the tsunami was coming. The elephants unchanged themselves, helped each other to get free, and started running uphill. And even what we so often call the stupid street dogs survived because they knew what was happening. Only we two-legged animals, unfortunately, did not realize, and we walked straight into the danger with the very sad results, which I'm afraid during the commemoration of the 10th year, a lot of people will feel a lot of pain, and I feel with them. As of the tsunami in Japan, the tsunami we had this year, or 2 years ago, was by far not the highest. It was only, and I stress the word only, 24 meters. As you can see, in the 18th century, there were much bigger tsunamis, and as you can see on the picture, during the 18th century, signs were placed all over Japan to say this is how far the tsunami of 1771 reached. Please do not go beyond this. And if you look at the little gentleman walking there, you can see how big those signs are, and really not easy to overlook. Yet in only one village they respected these signs, and in this village nobody died. So I think it's very much, as Imtiaz already said, we are creating our own crisis. We have to learn to risk and see the risk, assess the risk to avoid crisis, and by being more preventive to avoid the disaster. As they say, prevention rather than cure. And this is a system I'm teaching and preaching all over the world. It is a matter of constantly asking what can go wrong, and what risks are we running, and then determine the risks that are important to deal with, and then implement the strategies. But sadly, that's not always happening. As you can see here very clearly, we have a crisis. A car dropped in the water, very little risk prevention, and a little bit of crisis management. A truck is coming, getting the little car out, and because we brought a cheap solution, a little truck, the crisis is becoming bigger, and now we have to take a bigger truck to bring the cars out. And as you can see here, the crisis is even getting bigger, and we need the third truck to get the first truck and the second truck out. Yes, bringing the third truck was more expensive, but we would have saved a lot of time and a lot of money if the this truck would have been there first. So don't try to do things the easy way, the cheap way. Do it the full way and go acceptably. And that's why with Impata we have been preaching for many years the 4R system of reduction, readiness, response, and recovery. Reduction, detecting the system, warning signals, preparing the plans, then, of course, executing the plans and returning to that. It's very clearly that we are doing a not so good job in being more proactive. The reduction readiness is where I have the biggest challenges with my customers in investing in that area, and where we're doing a pretty good job and reacting more or less professional is, of course, in response and recovery. But that would be much better if we would have been better prepared in 1 and 2, the reduction and the readiness. And that's why Tata produced this booklet, Bounce Back, greatly detailing all the systems and giving a kind of a skeleton to build on your own plan. So prevention rather than cure. Tourists want to feel secure, but not feel the security. And that's, some hotels, some organizations do pretty well. A lot of them do not very well. A good example, as far as we can talk about good examples in crisis management, is how well London was prepared when this terrible accident happened on 7705, and 3 trains and 1 bus were blown to smithereens. They have been working on being prepared over the last 30 years. And with the cooperation, exactly as Alex mentioned, of all the crisis management related organizations, they were able to handle this crisis in such a way that by the next Monday, life in London was back to normal, and hardly any tour was cancelled, and not even one exhibition or conference was cancelled. It was being prepared. As you can see, you can download this manual directly from the website because it's in the public domain, and I really suggest that if you're interested, you have a look at this and visit this website. Just before the Olympic Games, they prepared the next one. And as the previous speakers already said, there are many reasons to prepare. Alex mentioned duty prepare. That's definitely one of this. Cross-negligency is a word that we will hear and the future generations will hear much more, and we cannot simply ignore it anymore. I don't have to talk too much about brand protection. I think everybody knows how important that is becoming because tourists want to be in a safe destination. And if your destination doesn't have and isn't perceived like safe, the people will stay away. Consumerism, the internet, it's all over the place. Everybody has a camera and a picture, and we have to learn that. And sadly, the lawyers are on the prowl looking for new opportunities, and for them, this whole area will become a major source of business. We don't see too much of that in Asia yet, but I can guarantee you, if you look at Europe and the States, it'll be there soon. And last but not least, a very old rule that I already learned as a little kid at hotel school: planning prevents poor performance. And that's exactly why an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Surviving is important. Striving is elegant. Let's not live off the benefits of the good times, the benefits of others, and let's not steal that away from each other and be proud that we can survive. Challenging the business model before a crisis does. How many of you have done simulations? How many have done risk assessments and do some scenario planning so that you are not in the so-called SHIT creek and you don't have to pedal upstream? Striving, that's fighting. Value-based principles. Setting clear directions and goals. And know how to fight the big ones and the small ones. Weather the storm. Takes only one positive thought when you are ready, and you can overpower all the negative thoughts that we find so sad we see in our industries. Reliance is all about being able to overcome the unexpected. Prepare, prevent, preempt is what we really are thinking about. And please, please, please realize that the grass is not greener at the other side of the fence. Because if you look too much at the other side of the fence, then this can happen to you. And I really hope that will not be the case. So, dear listeners, let's stop saying this is not my job, this is your job, you have to do it, no you do it, no you do it. And at the end of the day, nobody does it, which is really what I see happening still, and where we have a lot of problems. As I mentioned, I'm in the UK at the moment. I lectured the last 2 weeks at 3 different universities on this subject. And it's amazing to hear all those very professional lecturers and leaders of those tourism schools saying we haven't paid enough attention to it. So let's pay more attention to it. Let's see how we can help education. Let's see how operations can adapt their policies and procedures. And let's see how the buyers and therefore the consumers can ask for more of that. If you don't control the risk will control you. And that is really the bottom line of this presentation. I hope that this has helped you a little bit. And I now hand over back to the PACA headquarters in Bangkok. Over and out. No, not out.
Great thoughts, excellent ideas, and some really nice things for people to think about. We now have time for a bit of a panel discussion. I was just wondering if Alex would like to comment on a little bit more in detail on any of the points that were raised, and then to be followed by Bert on any other thing that you might have missed out on.
Yes, which particular points do you have in mind?
Up to you. I'll leave that entirely your call. Anything specific that you'd like to that triggered your thought process from Bert's presentation, from my presentation, that you'd like to comment on a little bit more? If there are any of the people listening to the webinar who'd like to jump in, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I mean, my observation in the tourism industry now over the past 10 years is really that people always expect others to be prepared, and we expect that there are systems in place, but at the end of the day, it is really up to the individual and to yourself to thing and to add that you have to practice, and I can't stress that enough. It is the little things that kill, and unless you really play the entire scenario from A to Z, you will not find those little traps that in the end compromise your preparedness.
Yeah.
Winston Churchill once said the first casualty of every war is a battle plan, and I can also refer to that, because if you are prepared too heavily, you've got too many details, you will fail. Come up with plans which are practical and very pragmatic, and that leave you enough leeway to react to the unexpected.
India, I would like to come back to your 3D part of the presentation. Decent, debate, and democratize. I think that's where we have the biggest problem. Being or dissenting and discussing and not agreeing on what is important and what is not important should be the crucial part of starting to develop a more proactive approach, which is basically what we're talking about. Unfortunately, quite often when people dissent, this is simply the subject is taken off the agenda, taking off the roles of advocacy, and suddenly people do not really want to talk about this because next week is Christmas, so why should we discuss about this? And then start avoiding debate. We had a lot of debate within Tata on this subject. Unfortunately, there was some dissent there, and I'm very happy to see, and that's why I'm getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, to see that Tata is bringing this up again, and that we can continue debating what we have been debating over the last couple of years. And I think this is fantastic. And the more democratic we can debate this and not being told from high levels that this is not a priority anymore, the better it is.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions on the that are waiting to be that have been asked by any of the panelists by any chance?
Alex wanted to say something.
Alex has?
Yeah, he was raising his hand.
Alex?
Okay.
Ask did you have a point? Alex, did you have a point you wanted to raise?
Oh yeah, one more point. I think we really need to look at why businesses are not prepared. And I really believe it is because the consumer so far has not been given the choice to choose a safe business or a safe product. And maybe organizations like PATA and governments can work harder to give the power to the consumer to make choices. If you could choose on TripAdvisor whether a hotel is prepared or not, you would choose the hotel that is prepared. You would choose safer airlines. You would choose safer tour operators. But as long as we don't empower the consumer, who at the end defines the product that we are offering, as long as that doesn't happen, I think we are missing out on a very, very, very big incentive for being better prepared and for being more resilient.
Alex, the question there is who certifies the preparedness? You know very well we have a lot of five-star hotels in Thailand that are not certified, and it's just the owner that decides they are five-star. I hear a lot of owners saying we are prepared, and the certification is one of the challenges that I think we haven't tackled right away. As you know, the UNISDR is trying to put something together, but that's stuck into all kinds of discussions, and unfortunately not very practical approach. But I used to be involved in that. I hope with the new management they will continue to be involved in there, because it's the certification and the value of certification is the role or the challenge. Because if we talk ISO, it's great for large organizations, but if I ask a resort somewhere in Nakhon Nowhere in Thailand to certify on ISO, which is costing a lot of money, they will simply not do it. So I hope that also the certification address can be picked up again by Tata in a very strong way, and working together with the UNISDR, coming to this safe hotels or whatever their resilient hotel plan, that I think we will do so. Certifying a destination to be safe, let's be honest, that's probably mission impossible because of the so many factors playing a role there that even a destination cannot really control that and guarantee that.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, we have a question from Rick Bogle. Is the PATA bounce back manual available for download at the pata.org website? This is from Rick Bogle of the PATA Japan chapter.
Yes, the bounce back manual is available at the PATA store. That's www.patastore.com to purchase. Of course, the PATA Japan chapter will get a discount. There's a discount for chapter members and for members. So yes, please feel free to purchase it at the PATA store.
Okay, thank you.
But please realize there is a Japanese version of this bounce back booklet, which I don't think is available online.
Well, we'll make arrangements with you, Bert, and to try to see how we can get that online as well for purchase for those who wish to purchase it. I believe there's other versions, right, in Chinese and
yeah, Chinese, and we were talking to ASEAN to translate it in the various ASEAN languages, but I have no idea where that is at the moment, and where perhaps Alex can tell us more about that.
Can we get any of the others?
So far, I think it has not been happened for budget reasons.
Okay. Same old story.
And who are the other people online who can ask? Can we
That's just it.
is there anybody, any of the listeners who would like to ask any questions?
Please type the question.
Please type the question into your box on the side, if there are any. We have quite a few very important people from the Maldives, I understand. Perhaps they would be interested in asking a few questions.
Tell me this would be. Please note, we'll also have the webinar available to view online once this is over. So if for those who were unable to view it, you can pass the link along, and we'll have it on the PATA website for others to view.
One comment that I thought I'd make is one of the problems that we have faced that I have seen in covering the travel and tourism industry since the first major crisis that I was at the coalface of when the first case of AIDS broke out in Thailand. It's always been this. First things first, there's a sense of denial that sort of steps in. That you, particularly when there are issues that might land up getting you bad coverage. So there's this tendency to sort of sweep things under the carpet and hope it will go away. And then problems become crises, which then takes on a whole new manifestation. The other problem that occurs is that because after every crisis, you get a lot of marketing activity and crisis management and everything else, and then people sort of begin to get complacent because the visitor numbers start coming back again. And in all these issues, it's always this sense of complacency that we'll worry about the next one when it happens. And that's it. Business is good, it'll bounce back, and we're all very confident, it's all a very resilient industry. And this is only perpetuating the problem, actually, and I think somewhere along the way this needs to change. Alex, any comment?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that point. And there is a big opportunity in preparedness. And also, as Bert said, we have to keep it practical and we have to keep it simple. And I see the private sector here as the big change agent. If we are waiting for governments and big organizations, even like the UN, to change the world, it doesn't happen. We have to go for the low-hanging fruit. We have to create incentives, and we have to take it from there.
I totally agree with Alex. If we wait for governments in all respects or for these big organizations like United Nations, we've been talking about the Safe Hotel program now for 3 years, and I don't think it's going to be finished in another year or two. So we need to do the private industry. But as you said, Intias, actually you were the one that told me not to use the word crisis management anymore, and I now talk about risk prevention and recovery management, which we have a lot of debates about. I think that's the approach it is, but as you said also, it needs a crisis to get people interested again. I see that every time after a crisis, I'm getting a lot of requests to talk and speak about it, and then after 6-8 months, instead of having 100 people in the room, you get 30 people in the room until the next crisis happens. So from that point of view, it's a sad story that people can't think beyond their own little turf and are not ready to have a forward view and to do exactly as we said in this seminar, to be better in preventing and preparedness, and then start making sure that we are preempting the crisis. Now, I'll give you one very short example. I did a job in a big governmental organization in Mauritius. The original list I got of risks they were running was 26 risks. After a brainstorm, we had 136 risks that they had to look at. And I only heard the same thing again. We thought it won't happen to me. And I think that's what's killing so much effort and so many managerial stuff. So starting to educate the future managers is one way of doing it. Working on destinations and working on simulations so they start realizing that things can happen to them is another way of waking up the private industry.
Yeah. I would like to add to that that I think we've got a communications problem. There are so many different organizations which claim to be active in preparedness and recovery and risk reduction, and they all live in their own silos, and they all have their own languages and their own way of doing things. And when you're attending these conferences about public-private sector partnerships, usually there are 200 attendees from NGOs.
Yeah, five. And five from the private industry.
Is from the private sector. The private sector is used to react to change. Big super governmental organizations and governments are rather conservative. I think we need to have more focus on translators and on focal points who can translate between different sectors. And I think that PATA as an industry that knows government and that knows private sector can maybe play a bigger role here to facilitate a more pragmatic and more fruitful cooperation that is results-based and not discussion-based.
Okay. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen, who are listening? No? Okay. Well, in that case, I think our 1 hour time is up. I'd like to just thank a few people. Firstly, I'd like to thank the PATA CEO, Mr. Mario Hadi, for picking up and actioning the idea of this webinar on a new topic. Hopefully, this will gain some traction across the travel and tourism industry in the months and years to come. Our technical people here, Kun Birod, Kun Paul, Kun Parita, and the PATA staff who helped put all the details and the technicalities together. My fellow panelists, Bert and Alex in Jakarta and London, and all the people who have signed on today. Thank you very much indeed for listening. And if you have any comments or questions, please send them to PATA about how we can improve on the quality of these seminars and provide you more food for thought going forward. Thank you very much indeed, wherever you are listening, and have a really good day and a good night.